In this episode, we meet Sehai Orgad, Senior Responsible Officer for City Safety at Wellington City Council. Sehai came to this work through the community and through a conviction that homelessness and city safety are two different problems that require two different responses. The person sleeping rough is more unsafe than the passerby. That distinction, simple as it sounds, is politically significant, and it shapes everything Wellington City Council's approach is built on. Sehai speaks with us about the Wellington Homelessness Coordination Service, why bringing mental health and addiction services into the room was the game changer, and what 4 and 5 hour deep dive case reviews actually reveal about the people the system has found hardest to reach. More information on this episode can be found in the episode description, and don't forget to subscribe to the Char Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
So hi, thank you for coming to talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Could you please let us know a little bit about yourself and how you've come to be in the role that you are here in Wellington?
So that's kind of where I started. And then over time, as things changed and progressed and developed and evolved, the new sort of Chief Operations Officer, James, sort of said, we really need some executive leadership in this space. You know, would you be, with Poniki Promise now, you know, the experience that you've had there, would you be interested in going into full-time Senior Responsible Officer for City Safety, and actioning the intent of the previous council to do a city safety plan and invest or look to invest money that they've allocated to improve safety and create outcomes with regards to safety and wellbeing in the CBD again. And that's kind of how things came to be for me being in this space. And then eventually leading the team in city safety in a newly established City Safety and Wellbeing business unit.
Tell me the nature of that work that you do with your team here and now on the ground in the Wellington context. What does that look like?
It's quite operational. And what started as looking into the work that we've already done over the years, and by done I mean whether it's research, whether it's big strategy pieces of work, or you know, aspirational kind of visions of the way that we want to be with the community. It was taking it, recognising it, understanding what we've learned from it, and then really trying to push some actions or some interventions in place, or put them in place so that the people who are using our CBD could actually see some improvements tangibly. So we created the City Safety Plan, and I keep on saying it's an action-oriented plan. People should be able to see this plan, look at the pillars that we've set up to sort of set the strategy for city safety and wellbeing, and see and recognise some of the tactical interventions that we've put in place, from things like safety points, and which are like intercom poles sort of around the CBD, right through to the Māori wardens that we've invested in to uplift that visibility, or investing in safer venues training for hospitality staff. These are all parts of the way that we're piecing together this ecosystem of safety in Wellington CBD.
Awesome. And I acknowledge that local government doesn't have control over a lot of the levers that are perhaps the root causes of much of the sort of issues that arise. You know, overconsumption of alcohol being one, the economy and poverty and drugs and addiction, and there are many things that go on in the city. Accepting that local government doesn't have control over many of those, what do you see as the Wellington City approach and the Wellington City role alongside others in this context?
I mean, and therein lies the kind of $X question, right? I think that one of the things that I'm really proud of is at the beginning of this plan, we put up a slide to our councillors in our community and said, these are the things that we can't control, that we don't have control of. And those things were linked to, very deliberately linked to the perceptions of safety that we were getting told from the community that people were seeing as a negative perception of safety in the CBD. Things like drug and alcohol harm, visible rough sleeping, the effects of what's going on in terms of the societal changes and poverty. So we were very clear with the fact that these are things that we don't have levers into. But what we do have is a mechanism of facilitating really meaningful engagements and conversations around what might help or what might be a solution with the community to help improve that outcome. We also have a really important lever, which is through the advocacy mechanism of local government, through our councillors and mayor, to have those conversations with central government. And there was definitely a recognition that we need to have those conversations in a much more deliberate way, much more organised and coordinated way, and one where a very clear outcome was agreed upon so that we could work together on. So, not everybody, it's very common for the narrative to go, when you're talking about city safety, it was very common to say, I saw a rough sleep, walk past somebody who was sleeping in the street and, the city's not safe. Well, okay, can we just unpack that for a second and look at what are the levers that are at play in that one situation? First of all, the person that's probably walking and seeing somebody sleeping rough is feeling probably more awkward than unsafe. And actually the reality is that the person who's sleeping on the street is probably more unsafe than the person walking by. So it's addressing those really awkward conversations as well and saying that city safety is not a homelessness issue, or homelessness is not a city safety issue. The two are distinct, but we have to address the safety of both the person who's walking by and the safety of that person living in the street, and understanding how can we look at having a greater impact on both of those things through the coordination of conversations or interventions, or the way that we work with partners to address those things.
That's awesome. That's really helpful. I mean, last week I had a conversation with Andrew Little about this, and just acknowledged and gave him our appreciation from a community housing perspective about the attitude and approach that we see, and the tone has clearly been set at the top with the mayor around streeties and rough sleepers, and the need for a manaaki and health-based response rather than an enforcement and corrections response. And I think you're an exemplar in terms of the approach that you take. Can you talk me through how that works collaboratively with other agencies like the police or others?
There's it's interesting because Wellington is compact in nature, and so because of that closeness, you get to know people pretty well, and whether they are a partner in the service delivery or a recipient of that service delivery, people we tend to know our community or of them or their experiences. We're also very lucky that historically Wellington City Council, through the harm prevention team, has done a significant amount of work of understanding the issues and the research that is the lived experience research and the actual real work of engaging in outreach. So we've been able to build off that knowledge base, which has allowed us to have a very different kind of conversation with police. Also, police, we're lucky that they have we have a unique relationship with them. They set out through the Pōneke Promise to build a closer collaborative relationship with us in addressing the harm that was occurring in the CBD, and were very open in saying, this is the way that we see things. How can we work together to address them from a different angle, not just an enforcement angle? So that is a different culture, and we took advantage of that because that benefited us in the way that we work and also our community. And again, being very clear with our elected members and our community that we are a strategic partner with the police. That means that it goes beyond saying, yeah, we support you in what you do and we'll turn up to your meetings. That means that when things are hard and we need to really figure out how to solve a really tricky problem, we do more than pick up the phone. We work out a program together of working.
Yeah, and it seems like you turn up.
And we turn up, exactly. So there's some depth there. Things might not always work out, things are not always rainbows and roses, but at least there's a commonality in the understanding. We are also so that's throughout the leadership of the police here in Wellington, from the area commander right down to the beat sergeant, the senior beat sergeant, who have been working in the space for many, many years and have a very similar understanding of the people who are vulnerable, their backgrounds and things that have worked and maybe not worked so much in the past. And then there are the relationships that we have with our providers. Again, we're lucky to have the Wellington City Mission and DCM here. And we have a really great, again, strategic relationship with them. And the strategy means beyond just handshake, hi, how you doing? You're doing a great job, pat on the back. It's, hey, this is really tricky. We need to do something different, which ultimately led us to the conversation around how do we work better together to identify the gaps between us so that we can deliver a greater impact to the people who need us the most.
It's great to hear that, and it's similar. We're hearing similar stories about excellent collaborations, particularly with the police and with community agencies. Can we dive a little bit deeper on what that looks like in the realms, for example, of people experiencing homelessness and health and mental health, and just connecting those dots up? Because for the general public, often there's a narrative around homelessness and street dwellers that is unhelpful. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate, actually, to a large degree, and to draw direct lines and connections between people who are physically unwell and mentally unwell and often recovering from trauma, and how that looks when we're engaging at the coalface on the street on a day-to-day basis.
I remember when I first came into this role and really trying to problem solve on one particular case, a person who has been living on the streets most of their lives, and we've all known about this person, and understanding where that person had been and the kind of trauma that person had been a victim of, and really then talking to the harm prevention team and speaking with and articulating these issues with my chief and saying, how would you expect a child to manoeuvre these situations? Because that's essentially what we're dealing with here. And then also articulating that to some of our elected members in personal conversations of, this is the kind of trauma that this person has been through. And kind of going deep into that and letting that sit with them for a minute before then talking about what are the things that we can put in place to mitigate the risk and to problem solve together.
Pretty tough territory you're in there, because empathy is something that's hard to teach.
Yes, but as soon as you make it relative to, I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but when you outline, when you say that somebody has the cognitive ability of a child, that kind of change the situation and actually the perception of who that person is. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I read a line that Millie had put into an article recently that when we tried to lift the profile of the team around if you only saw or got a hint of some of the harm that person had been through, you just want to wrap your arms around them. And when you start from there, the conversation's very different.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that we have leadership in Wellington City Council, obviously beyond the elected members, but the management side, my chief, who has the appetite to try something different because he knows that what we've been doing or what various mechanisms have been doing for such a long time just isn't working. So something different needs to happen in this space. There's a gap in the discourse when it comes to homelessness or housing, and that mental health is not at all, it doesn't seem to be emphasised enough that it needs to be part of that conversation. Because providers know this, the sector knows this, that unless you have the right wraparound services, and some people might not need the same kind of intensity, but unless you have the availability and the access to wrap services around that person while they have a house, that house will not be maintained. Some people just don't have the ability to look after themselves, and it's more than just a roof. It's care, and it's somebody to look after them, and mechanisms of looking after those people, some of our people, yeah.
I've only just recently become aware, and I'm no expert, but of the harm and the scale of the harm, particularly done by alcohol, with fetal alcohol, for example. And it speaks to the point that you're making and the comment that you made from what Millie had said. I don't think a lot of New Zealanders quite understand. There's a few things, right? Around about half or less than half of pregnancies in New Zealand are planned. And there is damage done by alcohol in utero that permanently impairs the human brain for the rest of your life. And I think if people understood that is sometimes at play, our responses might be slightly different and might come from a more empathetic and manaki type approach than it's your fault, you've made bad choices in your life.
100%, 100%. And as you see, it happens more often than not. The Homelessness Coordination Service is set up to work with a cohort of 30 that we've talked about. And the cohort of 30 are people who we've known who are rust sleeping, living in the streets for over decades. So, and I'd say, in looking at, in knowing the experiences that those people have faced, they are significantly traumatized and have treated that trauma with alcohol or drug addiction and other things that will get them through. When you apply that thinking through, and try to apply it to yourself and your family, of having the worst day you could possibly have and having no resource available to help you or even speak the language that you understand, how can a person pick themselves up?
Yeah. How would you want people to respond to you if that was you in their shoes? Fair enough. Sehai, I'm interested to hear, one of the things we're exploring with this series is looking for those little golden nuggets of things that we've done. It could be a program, it could be an attitude, an approach, a process. Those things that have worked really well, that you've observed have delivered really good outcomes, that we might share with other people so that we could do more of them more often and in more places across the country. Is there something that stands out for you in the work that you and your team have been doing that's really lifted your spirits and given you some hope?
Oh, the whole raft of work that we do in this space is motivating within itself. The Homelessness Coordination Service, and it doesn't sound like the most snazziest title of all time, but that motivates me every day because of the fact that we deliberately ring-fenced a certain amount of funding and developed a different conversation with our strategic partners to work together in this space, and identified the gaps that people were literally falling through, and then applying a game changer, which was essentially health, MHADS, mental health and addiction services coming on board, because we've identified this group and are trialling this new way of working, and really seeing the change in the attention and care given to every single person on that cohort list. That is something I'm very excited about. I do get excited when I see I'm excited because it's a Wellington thing. There's the Social Investment Agency is, I know, it's kind of developing a similar approach in different ways nationally, and that's really great, because the data and the information and that collaboration between agencies is where we really need to find that sweet spot. And then on top of that, rather than just saying, that's yours, you own it, you run with it to one specific NGO, really saying, actually, you've got a lot on your plate, we all do as the sector. This is another resource that we're going to help you solve these problems with, and that resource will help escalate that case, find the barriers and try to get through them, as well as having the ability or the flexibility of like a small fund to put in place to solve a problem quickly, or if we needed to put up a respite bed for somebody to sleep there so that we can then find them to assess them for a health issue. We can do that. We can access that because we have this kind of mechanism to do so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if I gave you a magic policy wand and you could wave your magic policy wand around in any realm, not just your local government realm, where might you point that, and what might be some of the ideas, because what I'm hearing you say there is very interesting, particularly because it's actually more about coordination and collaboration than it is around huge amounts of new money.
Yeah.
And obviously this government and whatever the next government is, it looks like we're going to not have much money. It doesn't matter which flavour we end up with after the election. It seems like our national finances are in a bit of trouble, and we're going to have to do as much as we can with what we've got.
Yep.
Where would you point your wand?
I mean, it wouldn't just be at one place, and I think that shows the complexity, right? We always talk about it's not one magic bullet, because it's not. It is a commitment, and it's a commitment from places like MHUD in terms of housing, or Kāinga Order, who are dealing with these kinds of issues in different pockets in our communities. Health is a big one, and that having health and the right mental health services present in those conversations and those collaborative efforts. I know that, for example, I know that the team has done a deep dive into a case, and they did it for 4 or 5 hours of putting everything in this person's case on the table, and literally going into a deep dive of every service that person has tried to have or be a recipient of, and finding out why it didn't work, and then addressing it from that angle, and then trying to close that gap. That's deeper collaboration or coordination. What I would hate is to say, okay, let's coordinate better, and that would end up in a meeting of a whole bunch of agencies coming together, talking about an issue, and then leaving again with the same problem hanging over our head. No, we need to do something that actually has follow through, that actually makes progress, so that person or that family or that situation can be a step closer to being looked after and cared for.
Beautiful. And it occurs to me that one of the attractions, perhaps, if we're pitching this idea to the health system, I think framing it in a way that says to the health system, we can reduce your emergency department demand.
100%.
Is attractive to them.
As soon as you put the cost together of what not doing this looks like, then it's a much more attractive quantum. It's a more attractive formula.
Yeah.
And we're doing a briefing to council next week on this. And although we're not putting the specifics into the paperwork of, a case study, we will be talking about the costs that we have saved in one case where that person is so much better off with this wraparound support than they would have been if they'd just been, picked up, gone off to prison, cycled out of prison, dropped off at the train station, ended up on our street again, did the same kind of level of offending, and then there would be an offence to the public, an offence to him. This, the cycle just keeps on continuing at a cost to the community, at a cost to the city, but in a more kind of spread out way.
Yep. Sehai, could you tell us about the implications of the move-on orders and what that might look like here in Wellington?
Advice to the Mayor's office on what the move-on orders might look like, noting that we still haven't, done.
Yeah, we haven't seen the detail of what the move-on orders are intended, but we get the idea, right?
Well, yeah, and I think I sent you an email about it recently, doing an analysis of the commentary from various ministers and draft wording. What we would feel our biggest challenge would be that the follow-up of that move-on order would be fragmented for us.
Yes.
So say, for example, and I'll put it in day-to-day operational terms, if we know that we are supposed to engage with a specific person and we know where they would typically be based on a number of different factors in that person's life, if they've been moved on or have been engaged with in an enforcement way, and we can't find them again, there's a domino effect of the care that's been lined up to apply to that person and their case or their family. So there are ramifications in the lack of follow-up and engagement from the sector if we were to apply the move-on orders in this kind of very broad brush way. Now, I will say, when we've and we've spoken to, obviously, the mayor's, we've had this conversation with police, and we know that the way that we work already in Wellington is that we know about cases and we know about situations before things are...
Well, you know most of these people by name.
Correct. So we can apply some intelligence and some care in the way that we would approach these kinds of situations, and we do so again in partnerships with the police, and that's kind of the approach that we'd take.
Well, I commend you and the work of your team and the approach of the council. On behalf of the sector, we're really thrilled that you take the approach that you do, and it works, and it's difficult, and we get that, and it's worth it if you look at the outcomes that you're getting. And so when it comes to move on orders, from our perspective as the community housing sector, we're saying, forget it, let's do what works instead.
Yes, yeah. And I, moving a problem on to another place is we've already said, it's a displacement tool. That's something that that is something that we would find challenging, again, in terms of the engagement, the follow-up, the wraparound support of the people who need it the most.
And not addressing the underlying root causes. Yeah. Hey, Sehai, thank you very much for taking time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'd like to thank Sehai for taking the time to speak with us for this episode. More information on this episode can be found in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to the Char Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.